I'm Arthur Kent. Welcome to History Undercover. Our program is a revealing look at the African slave trade from an unconventional perspective. Slavery remains one of the most painful chapters in history, one that still reverberates in America and around the world. Accounts of the slave trade are generally straightforward. Guilty Europeans arrive with whips and chains to capture and enslave innocent Africans. But forms of slavery were commonplace in Africa long before white men arrived. The slave trade evolved into an organized partnership between Europeans and Africans. The producers of our program spoke with descendants of slaves and descendants of the tribal chiefs who grew wealthy by selling their fellow Africans. Without question, there was more than enough blame to go around. Join us now as the History Channel presents The African Trade. Gorée Slave Island off the west coast of Africa, and a group of African Americans in search of the past. For the Africans shipped from here across the Atlantic, this was the last sight of their homeland, and Gorée Island was just one of many transit ports for the slave trade. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, around 12 million Africans crossed the Atlantic into slavery. It is the largest ever long-distance forced migration. Their descendants visit Africa to reclaim their history, a history both distressing and uncomfortable.
Here, between 100 and 150 women were packed in. They were held here for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, depending upon the time the ships came to take them away. They ate here, they slept here, they did everything.
And they died here.
And they died here. Shall we continue, please? Sometimes they raped the women. When the governor wanted to do that, he stood on the balcony up there, ordered. The gates were opened, and all the women came out. That was the only time the women were allowed out. So that from there, he could look through to pick one. The picked one was made to go up there where the governor would be waiting.
Appalled by the cruelties of the Europeans, the visitors become curious as to how Africans fell into their hands. So they ask their guide.
This part of our history is difficult to tell and hard to believe. There were intertribal wars. Those stronger tribes were raiding the weaker ones, capturing them, selling them to the African dealers who brought them here and sold them out. All the tribes were involved in the slave trade, no exemption. So please, we are going to the top.
So we really can't blame the Europeans because we sold our own.
It takes two.
That's right. That's right. Greed.
Money.
Greed.
This was what they called the Slave Coast. Just 10 years after Columbus crossed the Atlantic, the Spanish landed the first African slaves in the New World. Over the next 3 centuries, the trade spread along the shoreline of West Africa as European demand extended from gold and ivory to human beings. The Europeans protected their interests with fortified trading posts along the African coast.
The forts were not actually built to assert power by Europeans over Africans. They were essentially built in the context of rivalries among Europeans. And in fact, if you go to the Gold Coast, I think it's clear the main batteries of guns are actually pointing out to sea rather than inland. So they were basically built as a consequence of intra-European conflict rather than as an attempt to assert European power over Africans.
Almost without exception, the forts were constructed with the agreement and often at the request of the local African rulers. The Europeans paid them ground rent. There were even treaties between the two sides in which African rulers, signing with crosses, granted monopoly trading rights to one European country while shutting out the rest for a price.
In most circumstances, the balance of power at the coast lay very decisively with Africans, and therefore Europeans had to deal on a basis of recognizing African authority. The Europeans were there on sufferance, yes.
The old charts of West Africa hold a further clue to the nature of the European presence. The coastline was mapped in detail, but they filled in the interior with pictures of exotic animals. Sometimes they admitted the truth.
Beyond this, the country is unknown to Europeans.
So, with the Europeans holed up in ships and castles at the coast, how exactly did 12 million Africans fall into their clutches?
On ne se rend pas souvent compte que les Africains de l'intérieur eux-mêmes y ont participé. Et c'est pour cela que lorsqu'on pose le problème en termes de responsabilité, il y a des responsabilités intérieures, il y a des responsables ou des complicités intérieures, parce que de toutes les façons, il aurait été impossible pour les Européens d'embarquer autant de monde sans que, à l'intérieur, ils aient bénéficié d'une collaboration à un niveau ou à un autre. Il y a eu une implication profonde des Africains dans le trafic.
If the Europeans had gone inland, this is what they would have seen. A network of slave routes, now overgrown and forgotten. The slaves were often sold on from one set of African merchants to another. Convoys could take a year to reach the coast. A river, once deep and fast-flowing, where the slaves washed before they were shown to the next African buyers. 200 years ago, a busy slave market in the interior. Now, slaves could even rise to positions of authority. Some owners were kinder than others, but the principle was always the same.
Un esclave est un esclave. C'est-à-dire que la condition d'esclave, c'est d'abord ce qu'il y a d'humiliant, d'inacceptable. N'est-ce pas? Le reste, comment il est traité, si l'esclave domestique est mieux que l'esclave exporté, etc., c'est une question de détail de la manière dont l'esclave est traité. Mais le fait est que l'esclave n'a pas sa liberté, il ne s'appartient pas, il est la propriété. Il est la propriété d'un autre. Si on définit l'esclave comme tel, tous les esclaves sont les mêmes d'abord en ce qui concerne le principe de liberté chère à tout être humain.